Hello, Lorenzo here. This is KSP Next, episode 23, where we return to the moon with two missions. The first one, the Lunatic 3, is aimed to do a manned orbit of the moon. Now, lately we've been doing several manned lunar missions, flybys, closer flybys, and this will mark the first time we actually establish a stable orbit around the moon. The ascent vehicle, we know by now, this ascent went pretty much without a hitch. The ascent was steep enough not to incinerate the fuel tank, yet shallow enough to be efficient, so that we have lots of delta V to take with us to the moon. After orbital insertion, we now have the trans-lunar injection burn. All engines are performing pretty nominally. We do have enough life support for, I think, about 2.5, maybe even 3 weeks of enough margin on that. This is with the uprated efficiency space vessel, meaning less monopropellant, less life support, and therefore more delta V. Here we are finishing the translunar injection with the space vehicle, the service module with the three AJ-10 engines. Three engines, of course, for higher reliability. If one of them fails, there's an increased chance that our pilot will be able to steer back home. Anyway, this mission so far is going off textbook perfectly. The engines are igniting one more time to finish off the burn, fine-tuned by MechJeb using the maneuver node planner, and that should safely see us to the moon. And surprise, it has. Carefully oriented the ship towards the moon, towards the sun for maximum solar power. Power is still delicate. We should be able to get RTGs in the future to help that, but for now we have to angle our solar panels pretty carefully. Anyway, here we are at the moon at an altitude of about 500 kilometers and burning to insert us into orbit. This is probably the most danger any Kerbal has been in, and there we have it. Orbit has been established. That's an objective that's achieved. And what I was saying is that this is probably the most danger any Kerbal has been in the program so far. Now, why is that? That's because in the case of a sudden engine failure now, there is absolutely no way he's going to get home. Like in a low Earth orbit, there is a low amount of delta V required to re-enter. Even in lunar flybys, there is a pretty low amount of delta V required to return home. See Apollo 13, they had a fuel tank accident on the way to the moon, yet they only needed a few course corrections. Actually, not even a course correction, they only did their burn to speed up. They would have gotten back to Earth, but after their life support ran out. Anyway, once you're in orbit of the moon, you absolutely need your engine to do a sizable burn before you're going to get back. So that's extra scary. And that's also the reason why we have three engines. So in case one fails, as I said already, we have a better chance of actually surviving. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to drop our orbit nice and low, a couple dozen kilometers, and take some science from near the moon. A quick peek at the delta V readouts shows that we've got a little bit under 2 kilometers per second left at this point, and our return to Earth should take about 700 to 800. That leaves us a very fair margin to play with. Anyway, we're coming up on the completion of this burn. Our periapsis is now below 100 kilometers, so now all we have to do is wait until we get a little bit closer to this moon. There we are, we're at 61 kilometers, still descending, but not that rapidly. This is about our periapsis. Getting nice and copious science points from this location, but unfortunately we don't have communications equipment on this vessel. There's a teeny tiny design oversight. Fortunately, our pilot has the mental fortitude not to go insane in 10 days, and he will gladly carry a suitcase full of reports back home, because why not? Anyway, we spend quite some time here near the moon and then decide to depart back for Earth. The three engines so far are performing wonderfully, no failures as of yet, and everything is proceeding according to plan. That's the return home burn fixed up. I don't have a nice spacey word for that. And with some time warp, we are heading back into Earth's atmosphere. Our periapsis is currently at about 66 kilometers, which should be just around the sweet spot for a nicely controllable re-entry. Controllable due to the tilting of the capsule. As we can see in the resources view, We're running low on quite a bit of things, but nothing is critical, so we have completed this mission in the allotted margin. Separating the capsule and now preparing for entry, which is something we've done a lot of times before. Therefore, the prospects of Bob are pretty good at this point. Actually, this re-entry, I kept the capsule angled up for a pretty long while, and we're coming up on our periapsis now. We actually have a pretty high vertical speed. We're actually going to climb out of the atmosphere again, so I'm rotating down and trying desperately to stay within the atmosphere, because if we bounce back out and spend another couple days in orbit, Bob will die. Because the capsule itself doesn't have a lot of supplies. Fortunately, that worked out fine. This was the longest re-entry by far, but we did manage to not escape back out into space and safely parachute down into the ocean. That's a contract fulfilled, money in the bank, and another first with a manned orbit of the moon. Now for the second mission, the third Tranquility probe, we are actually going to try and land on the surface. We're using the new maximum performance booster with some miniaturization technology and solar panels and science instruments and tiny thrusters to get this probe onto the surface of the moon. During the launch here, because the probe is so light, we got so much speed going that almost the second stage overheated and exploded. This is why I'm angling back into the prograde vector, so the aerodynamic stresses on that stage are shielded by the nose cone partially. It was a bit touch and go for a while, but fortunately we did make it through the atmosphere without popping. And there we have it. Earth orbit has been... No, I'm too premature. Earth orbit has not been established, but the stages have separated, and Earth orbit will soon be established, on which we can ditch fairings. Actually, I'm way late on ditching those fairings, where we can work on establishing lunar transit. Anyway, that's what we're doing now. Still on the orbit actually, but here, have a look at the spacecraft. Nicely gold-plated fuel tank, some solar panels on the service module, and a tiny lander on top. During the finalization burn, we get an engine failure. We have a lot of engines on the second stage, so it's not an immediate problem. But as the stage gets lighter, I do throttle down, actually disable the opposite engine to reduce steering load. But then another engine fails. Annoyingly, it's the one right next to the one that failed before. So in order to not have too much of a cutback in thrust and burn time, I do reignite the other engine, causing the ship to wobble a bit, but mostly stay on course. So two engine failures on the second stage. It's more than we've had in every other mission. Even a third one now, although that's partial. So this second stage is not hasn't been built to spec, let's say that. But fortunately, the design is capable of absorbing such failures. Anyway, here we are on the way to the moon again. Actually, are we on the way yet, or I'm confused? No, we're doing a deep space maneuver to get our trajectory to reach the moon more better. Anyway, here we are at space, angled towards the sun. I forgot my notes for this episode. I do apologize. Rest assured, we are en route to the moon, and we have a very elliptical orbit now, and burning at periapsis to circularize that a bit, so that we can pick our landing site. Of course, before picking the landing site, it's important that it's sunlit, so we can see what we're doing, and that there's also communications coverage, because otherwise we won't be able to control the probe. We've established a low circular orbit now at about 100 kilometers, and turning around on our hydrazine thrusters, which are using the same fuel as our descent stage, to basically start our deceleration and landing burn. We are almost polar, so the sunlight is coming in a fairly oblique angle, but we do have a direct line of sight with Earth, so the deep space network can cover us wherever we go. I designed the lander to be small and agile, so the plan is to put it on retrograde attitude lock and control the descent by only turning the engine on and off. It's got 4 of the small 1 kilonewton thrusters, and that's balanced out pretty well against the lunar gravity, for a local thrust to weight ratio of about 2, if I recall correctly. Anyway, here in accelerated view, is a coast face toward our barely selected landing site. Basically, it was selected on the globe of the moon, not really on its local characteristics, which I will pay dearly for in the future. Anyway, slowing down the footage again, a second deceleration burn is coming up. A peek at the delta V window shows that we have a thick 2 km per second margin from here, which is more than enough. So I can afford to do these slow and inefficient deceleration burns. I suppose I could use MechJet to do a suicide burn, but I've never really trusted that robot. I prefer to do my landings myself. Anyway, here we are proceeding. We're at 24 kilometers now, but only 12 kilometers above the actual surface, as you can see in the readout in the bottom left. Our speed is pretty low, and our space service module is about to run out of fuel. I think it's run out now, so we're gonna have to get rid of that and proceed with just the lander. There we have it. It's really tiny. It's a Ranger probe core. It's got the antenna, and it's got some solar panels mounted, and they are covering the science experiments. And then there's the hydrazine fuel and of course the 4 thrusters. That's about everything that this lander is. I have done zero research into the fact of whether these solar panels will be able to provide enough power on the moon, but there's a battery on board. We should at least be able to return science, and if we're lucky we'll be able to keep it for future operations. Anyway, these tiny engines are slowing its descent. We're coming down, and a peek down shows that we're in a terrible spot, really. We're like at the bottom of a canyon in the shade. This is not good. But with the signal delay and the trepidations of maneuvering around the moon, I'm continuing my straight down descent, figuring that if we're gonna touch down, it doesn't really matter where, and keeping the lander for later, it really is a bonus. I have now disabled 2 of the 4 thrusters so that the deceleration thrust is a bit lower, and I can hopefully gauge a very smooth touchdown. Actually, the footage is turning purple here and there. Let's call that a transmission artifact. Anyway, we are less than 120 meters above the surface now. Our speed is almost zeroed out, and we have about 1 kilometer per second remaining. So if we do a nice landing, we can maybe even fly to another spot that's a little bit more sunlit. Anyway, we're now just hovering, sometimes occasionally going up and down, and just trying to touch down to the ground ever so slowly. Well, that was not a real slow touchdown. Yet again, we are on the ground, even if we're not quite stationary, so let's drop that objective achieved while we can. And whilst we slide into the bottom of this canyon, Mission Control quickly comes up with a plan to use the space-rated thrusters to actually act as ground brakes. So here we go. Thrusters on full reverse, and we can see our speed on this slope is ever so gently decreasing. So let's speed that up. It took a fair amount of time to slow down. Fortunately, the chassis is sturdy enough to deal with this. And here we are, near enough stationary, returning science from the surface of the moon. Not in the most elegant position, but we are doing it. So that means a contract successful, money in the bank. Yes. And now what? After like hours and hours of flipping the probe over, trying to launch it into space again, that all didn't work. We busted a few solar panels, but it's still in the shadow. And the only thing we can do is watch a little bit dejectedly as the batteries run flat, as it is in the shade here. And the lunar day is so long that it's it'll be weeks and weeks before the sun reaches it, and then it'll only have 1 solar panel exposed. So I think we have to write off this lander, but it did give us some good science and gave confidence to the program. Thanks for watching. Give confidence to my program by subscribing and liking this video, and I'll see you around for the next video. Thanks for watching once more. Have a nice day.